Welcome back to the Growth in Consulting podcast. It's a real pleasure today to be joined by Richard Harris, who has a really interesting background. And I know many of you who have smaller consultancies or consulting and tech firms that are interested in perhaps being sold at some point are going to find this really, really useful. Also, I know many of my students are going to find this useful, not least partly because of the subject matter, but also because Richard's had a really interesting career, starting off with theoretical physics as his degree, but then moving into more business development work, and then it seems that you switched to more sort of managing director, merger and acquisition work. So I guess starting off, Richard, it would be great if you could talk us through. We're not going to focus on careers, but you've had an interesting switch, firstly from theoretical physics to more sort of business development for different firms, and you've been very successful in growing that over 10 years. But then a switch, it seems, from more of a business development focus to doing more mergers and acquisitions, board membership, board advisory work. So how did that all work then?
Joe, thank you very much for the invitation. Look, it's really great to be here. I started out with I guess, an insatiable curiosity. So that's where the theoretical physics comes from. It's the largest Lego kit that you can get your hands on, the universe. How do you play with it? What can you do with it? And it was a fascinating journey, but my father ran his own business. My uncle ran his own business.
Okay.
And so, you kind of get exposed to that level of entrepreneurial DNA. In fact, I ran some businesses at school back in the day.
Oh, you're one of the Richard Branson group.
I can't claim success at anywhere near that level. Look, I had a ZX80, ZX81, so that dates me, right? I had one of those printers that used to create a black mark on a silver background. And the girls love band logos, so I would just print out a band logo in block.
Wow.
Silver. I'd sell them for £1 a pop. So as a school kid, I was quite rich by comparison. And that kind of spread into university. So I started running businesses on the side, and then ended up in marketing immediately after university. Then moved into IT because I started to work with data. And so this is, I guess, where you'd say the consulting side of things kind of really started to kick off, is because I was doing beer market modeling, as you do when you're a student. You leave university, you're very involved in beer, and this was just a fascinating thing. So I would get reports from the mainframe team, I'd have a look at them, but then the figures would shift each week, and they say, oh, that's because the mainframe SQL take you years to learn. It doesn't. You just need to understand what it is that you want and then apply yourself to it. So I started to get more and more into IT, moved across into IT. Actually got fired from one of the jobs I was working on. I was only a temp, right? So, and I'd got permission to produce a catalogue for an early e-commerce business back in the 90s. I produced it, but then a new head of department came in and used that as an excuse. Oh, you use corporate assets and what have you. But that was actually a blessing in disguise. And the reason I mention it is because I think it's an important lesson when you're in business. Setbacks are not always the setbacks, right? And it's more how you respond to these things, whether it's in a consulting business, whether it's in a product business, because you talked about Richard Branson, and a lot of these are apparently overnight successes. They're the arrow that flies so true. No arrow flies straight. No plan survives contact with the enemy. But after that, I went out. I had 6 interviews one week, 3 second interviews the next, 3 job offers the next. And I picked the one that gave me the most international exposure. And that kind of landed me on this consultancy pre-sales, technical pre-sales path.
Okay.
And it kind of grew out from there. So I worked for US VC-backed companies. I'd help them grow internationally. I'd be one of the initial founding, team members in the UK. So employee anywhere from about 2 to about 7. And then we would grow. I started out junior, became more senior over the course of about 3 years, and did a number of different ventures, but there were two IPOs, one trade sale, and I was senior enough at the second IPO to get an SEC blackout.
Okay.
So this was .com. With the trade sale, I handled the integration of the sales and the tech teams, but I was also, for that company, the iterations methodology expert. So I spent a lot of time training systems integrators and helping them understand the product and helping them with their consultancy sale into large businesses.
Okay.
For example, Gambro, Handelsbanken, to name but a few, up in the Nordics, and then down in South Africa, Vodacom, and a whole host of others as well. So I did that for a number of years. So that was interesting because they were a product company with a very heavy services arm as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And a big successful one, because we've got VC backing, we'd gone public, and then ultimately we did a trade sale, out the back end of that. So then post.com, I took about a year and a half off. So I went traveling, I learned to dive, did some fun and interesting things, then came back and started helping early stage blue sky, greenfield startups and very early stage companies raise money or grow. Most notable there was probably Nettel. Was about a 2 million turnover business.
Just on that, there's so much to dig into here, but just on that, before we move on to the more recent stuff, I've got two questions.
Yeah.
No, one is an observation. It is a question. So the first one is you ended up in a position which I often call I say to my students, it's the unicorn position, where somebody has solid business development skills and understands the sales context, but also has the technical understanding of how it works and what happens, and can have that conversation. Was that intentional, or did you just happen to end up? That's
a really good question. Look, I've always had a technical and conceptual leaning, right? So, I hence the science background, right? But I also did at least what it was back then, O-level computer science. And actually, I wrote a file security program in Z80A machine code, right?
Wow.
That was assembler, not machine code, but right? So there was a level of technical knowledge and codability, ability to code there. I never went back to that in my career to the level of being a coder. I'm not a developer, right? And I tended naturally to drift more towards the commercial side of things. But you're right. I found that balance between at least being able to understand what a developer could do, what a technical solution could do, how that would really work, rather than sales promising just everything.
Yeah, sure. Right?
Here's the holy grail. We've got 100. So that being able to bridge the gap was really, really powerful, and it lent itself to the consultancy. It lent itself to the technical pre-sales, because I could understand the customer's requirements, translate that into what we needed to do to the product, and then translate that into something that the salesperson could latch onto and sell. And so this was a really useful grounding for the later stage, for founding my own company, and then finally moving into M&A. But it's rare. I find people are either commercial or they're technical. And I work a lot these days with technical founders, and that's hard, right? That's much harder, because early stage companies, whether they're consultancy led, whether they're managed services led, and we can talk a bit about the difference between vertical IT services and managed services and why one is better than the other in many cases. The technology of early stage companies is usually brilliant. Right? Because they've got a degree of competence, they've seen a problem that they can solve, and they've gone and solved it. The challenge is usually on the commercial side. It's being able to monetize that. There are companies that solve, and I've done it myself, you solve a problem that nobody actually wants to pay for, because, or nobody can pay for, because the budget doesn't exist, right? You're so disruptive that these guys over here would have a use for it, but actually they rely on these guys over here who see this as a threat. So sorry, that's a lot.
No, it's great.
But no, it was accidental to start with, and then a deliberate theme once I discovered I was onto a winner.
And the second question leads on from what you said there. You kind of, you went off after the .com crash, you learned to dive, and then you kind of rather flippantly said, and I came back and started helping startups, get funding. Now, how on earth do you? I mean, you must have had connections, but if you're going into startups and you're trying to get them funding, that's two sets of connections that you need. You need the connections with the startups, and you need the connections with the funders. So how did that happen?
So I had some experience of fundraising, being involved as part of the team with the company I worked for. So I didn't have an amazing network. I didn't have an amazing level of knowledge. It just, to me, didn't seem like a particularly difficult process, but that was naivety and a lack of understanding of what I was really getting into. However, and I think this is probably true of anything, especially in this day and age, if you ask the right question or ask for the right thing to the right person in the right way at the right time, there has never been a time, and this was, I guess, pre kind of like LinkedIn, which really was transformative. But, once you'd moved, and I built a lot of contacts, ancillary contacts during that time, but once you moved into the LinkedIn era, the world became an open book. So you just needed to understand how to frame something.
Sure. Okay.
Put it to somebody in a way that resonated with them, rather than the broadcast method, which is what we all do when we found companies. And I got some consultancy roles, which again, I more sort of fell into by people that I knew, and therefore they said, well, I've got this requirement. Can you do this? You're technical. Can you evaluate the product? Can you look at the product strategy? Can you look at the sales team? Can you tell me if we're selling the right thing? How do I get from a low price point to a high price point?
Yeah.
Can you put all this stuff together? Oh, and by the way, we're doing a funding round, right? So this then goes to the funder. They look over it all, and then when you get success at the other end, you think, okay, I must have done something right. And it kind of like grows from there. So some of the companies didn't get funded, some did get funded. And before long, I quite quickly moved into a scenario where I wanted to be working on, my own technology, my own ventures, which is, when I started up Insignia, and that was my focus for the last 10 years. And you say, how did I get into M&A? Well, I think once you've been doing something for 10 years, that's a long period of time. And we've had some success and some things that weren't quite as successful and didn't quite go the way that we planned. And we now have a more IP-led strategy with that business, where we're licensing the patent portfolio that I built up. And we started with a consultancy-led approach to market, which is a two-edged sword. Consultancy is great as a business owner because it's revenue, right? And it's customer revenue. And especially if you don't know your product market fit, it can be a really good way to get early stage adopters to pay for things. Sure. However, when you then come around to sell your business, or even when you kind of like looking at raising funds, this then spins everything, because investors and buyers look at revenue through a series of different lenses. Yeah. The worst kind of lens is at the hardware kind of level. And that's not because there's anything wrong with hardware, it's just the perception of cost and risk in terms of being able to deploy and develop a solution. So you go up from hardware into IT services, which tends to attract low multiples to revenues, but can get quite interesting multiples on profitability. And so you kind of like get to one of those realization points where actually with product companies, the key to early success is massive growth and being able to show that I can scale the sales. Who cares about profitability? The key to a services company is usually getting it to scale and having an unreasonably high gross margin and an unreasonably high net margin, because you're doing some really clever stuff. And those are the kind of things that you don't really realize when you're selling out, that you've got to bake into your business model, into your operational plans, in order to have a chance to be able to sell the business for a meaningful amount of money. Yeah,
it's so interesting to talk to you, because you have this bigger, I'm very much focused on the consulting industry. It's interesting what you say just then. I've had a relatively recent client who wants to starting from scratch, got a bit of money behind him due to a previous sale. And was very much, I want to start a training business, and I showed him the multiples of training businesses versus consulting businesses versus software businesses, SaaS, and you could see his eyes open and suddenly go, actually, I want to start a software business. But I guess there's a broader point here, in that I'm seeing a lot of smaller clients starting to mix it up a bit. They, traditionally they've done consultancy, but they've found a gap or a need for a bit of software, and they've started to develop it, but that's not their expertise. And suddenly they're faced with, well, what do we do here? Do we become a software company? Because the margins are quite nice and the multiple is more. But my background's consulting, so I only really understand the consulting industry. Is that something that you see in your experience? And I know it's a general question, but what types of advice do you give there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yes, it is something I see a lot, because I think it comes about for a number of reasons, not just because people look at the multiples that you can get from a software company, but for me, that's a fairly compelling reason, because it's all about how much time do I have, how much resources do I have, what return am I going to get? I mean, even if you're on a mission, right? Even if you're on a passionate mission to save the planet or to do something in sustainability, at the end of the day, you will have greater impact if you get the metrics correct. So codification of knowledge, right? So, or process. So being able to automate, being able to have reusable components, whether they're frameworks, forms, some form of structure in your engagements. All of these things are building blocks for products. You then start to move into more expertise and expert automation systems, where you are coding quite complex things, either potentially from a true machine learning, so pattern matching. And there's a lot out there that's called AI that isn't, right? Yes. It's if then else or whatever. It's heuristics. There is nothing wrong with heuristics. For me, expert systems combine heuristics and AI to the best combination, in the same way as we have a left brain and a right brain. Okay. So this codification of expert knowledge to build out a platform is in some ways a natural progression if a business wants to take it far enough. But you're right, they lack the expertise to do this. So my suggestion is, you start that journey with your consultancy company, but at a point you take a strategic decision to separate the two. You keep the consultancy company and either run it as a static cash cow in the background, so you optimize for profit and you use that to fund the software development company over here, because you can take that software development company, software product company, the SaaS company, and you can go and raise, right? You can go and raise money for that far more easily than you can for either a consulting company or having the two together.
Yeah. Okay.
So at some point you're going to want to spin it out, and then that takes on its own life and its own trajectory. And of course, you don't have to run it. It is hard, right, to find an early stage career CEO or a co-founder that would come in and be the commercial head of that organization and allow you to either be a CTO or a strategy advisor, as the board member or shareholder, right? But that is a route that you can take. And if you can find, I think as a technical founder, if you can find that commercial co-founder, then you're on a good path. Because the challenge of a product company is it is the job of the founders to find product market fit and to nail that early stage sales cycle. So who do I sell to? How do I sell to? Who holds the budget? How do I reach them? What do I reach them with? What is the process I take them through from first contact all the way through to qualifying them out, dropping them into a nurture, or actually closing the sale and getting sign off on that? But you've got to nail that sales piece, and that's very difficult for the technical founders coming from the or from a consulting background,
And where does, I mean, this is out of my comfort zone here, so I know where I would find good consultants, and I've got lots of tips on sort of getting partners. But how does one go about finding a decent, experienced someone that can run a software business who isn't already running their own software business?
It's hard, right? Because if you look at the corporate stable, ex-corporate employees tend to have a corporate mindset, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to setting up a software business. I mean, when Nokia, which is just down the road from me, made a whole load of people redundant, I was brought in to help out with helping a few of them try to transition to running their own business. They got very generous grants. But what I could see and what I said to a number of them was that, if you keep doing what you're doing in the way that you're doing it, I'll give you 6 months you'll be back in a corporate job. Right?
Okay.
And they were. So it's very hard to find somebody from the corporate side transitioning out. You are more likely to find, I guess, perhaps a business angel, somebody who has maybe been through the process themselves, retired for a bit, got bored, and now feels renewed and refreshed enough to want to take on something, but actually has capital behind them, doesn't necessarily know what they want to do, but they understand the building blocks and mechanics and operating, best practices.
Sure.
Grow a company. So business angels is a good one. But then you can go to the other end of the spectrum, and there are plenty of early stage, younger founders who go, well, I want to found a business. So there are networking groups out there. I can't remember any off the top of my head, but I know that there are some of them that are dedicated to matching you up to find a relevant co-founder. And some of the, I guess, accelerators as well will also help you, can also help you in that respect. But networking is key, right?
Sure.
You need to be able to network and just meet people. And some of it is serendipity, but you can make your own luck by meeting enough people. So you've got to be prepared to put in that investment to try and find somebody, because it's hard, right? It's very hard.
Sure.
It's far harder to find an ops lead to be CEO or a sales-led CEO or somebody in sales than it is to find someone technical.
And for those consultancies and indeed SaaS starters, the founders, full stop, I guess, who they've identified a need, they're thinking of building something. Is your advice, and this is getting down to the sort of nitty gritty, but this is what a lot of CEOs or managing partners are thinking of. I'm guessing there's various routes to SaaS development or software development, and one of them is to use one of these wonderful platforms that has low code or no code, and you buy it off the shelf and you kind of retrofit it to your needs. Or do you start with, let's code it from scratch, which it seems, with my limited experience, you can pay, with a standard piece of software that does a few things, you can pay anything from 10,000 to 100,000 for something relatively simple. And I'm not sure of the difference. So how does one even start, the journey of building SaaS?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And it really depends on what SaaS you are building. SaaS is, to a certain extent, a business model, but I suppose you could also consider it a deployment model. If you look at the business model aspect of it, really all you're doing is getting something on a recurring revenue stream. So it's about the predictability and scalability of that revenue stream. From a deployment model, you're probably looking at a cloud-based infrastructure. So you've got everything from private cloud to public cloud. When we started out at Insignia, we outsourced some of our developments. Core of the platform was always in-house. Now, we knew we were going to be building an enterprise-grade product in omnichannel payments. So we're in a regulated or potentially regulated space with at least regulatory issues sitting around us. We definitely, whether we're regulated or not, and we weren't in the early days regulated, we definitely got issues around security, resilience, disaster recovery, load balancing, scalability. And when we started out, my co-founder, Matt Deacon, he was the former chief architect for Microsoft UK. So he had a Microsoft background. Right. Knew his Microsoft team, knew the Microsoft infrastructure. So my technical co-founder, obviously his expertise, his team steered us towards the Microsoft platform from day one. And when you looked at Azure back in, when was this, 2011, 2012, it didn't have half the bells and whistles that it did today. So we had to build a lot of this stuff ourselves. So that made that part of the development quite expensive. Now, yeah, of course you can get a platform, but you've got to remember, when you are selling your business, there is the buyer is buying IP, and I don't mean patents or trademarks in that respect, because patents and trademarks we could talk about if your listeners are interested. And I always prefer trade secrets if you can. Patent really, a patent only has a place if what you've done is potentially obvious after the fact.
Okay.
Once you've disclosed it, and everybody will copy you, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And then you have to go and be able to defend if that was your intention with patents. So patents are a two-edged sword. So you're building IP, and your IP, especially with a consultancy company transitioning to a product company, is based around the codification knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that knowledge, that process, and you're building on that. If you can build that on top of an existing substrate, use the existing substrate. There is no point in reinventing the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
What you've got is going to have value in terms of what it does. The potential restriction of that is that if you build it in Azure, you're going to be locked into Azure. So to move this over to an Oracle or an AWS, it's going to be time consuming and extremely costly. If you perhaps have a track record or funds behind you, a previous exit, or you can raise for a particularly complex product in a very high value space, you could develop on something like Kubernetes. But that comes with its own complete overhead. And in fact, one of the companies I'm advising at the moment, New Valaris, is building a orchestration and management layer that sits on top of Kubernetes.
Okay.
It actually gives you the utility of an Azure or an AWS.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Usability, right? And these guys are consultants. They're brilliant consultants, superb developers. They come from this consultancy development background, and that they've been working in this Kubernetes space for some time, and they say, this is hard, right? If you're going to build something, as they call serverless, right, spin it up on demand, and you're going to do it in a flexible way, there's a lot of moving parts to manage, a lot of things that you're going to have to write and build yourselves, as opposed to build out on Azure. But if you build out on Azure, you're locked into Azure. And then you've got the issue of multi-tenanted, not multi-tenanted. So there are some use cases that require data segregation, and they're not going to want a multi-tenanted environment. There are other cases where they're even going to want an air gap solution, right? They're not even going to want it on public cloud. So you can see, it's a long-winded way of saying it depends. The more data privacy, data security, or portability and flexibility becomes an issue, the more you're going to have to bespoke. And the more it's about codification, just pure codification and knowledge, the more you can get away with putting it on a cloud platform.
Thank you. So you used two phrases there that I could pretend I'm doing this for the benefit of my students, but I'm not. I'm doing it for the benefit of me. You said multi-tenanted, which I presume is having different clients on the same servers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said airspace, which I presume is having actual physical air between servers.
Yeah, it's an air gap system would not be connected to the internet, right? It's not externally accessible, right? It's internally accessible. So you'd need a data center on site. It's basically an on-premise ring fence solution. And
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you. And so this is great. We're getting so much, and this is rare knowledge for my. So firstly, thank you. But I'd like to. So for the last couple of years, you've been vice president of M&A at Corum Group.
Yeah.
And could you tell us a little bit about what Corum does and what your role is there, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, Corum is an investment bank. It's been around for 36 years, was founded by Bruce Milne. Bruce sold his software business and then bought a yacht. And then that was a really, really bad idea.
It always is.
Exactly. And what should I do? And he thought, well, you know what? I'm going to help other founders exit. So he built this company up over the last 36 years. He's still very active and involved in the business. Bruce's model is to get former entrepreneurs who've got at least an exit under their belt. So I sold the previous company. I used that to fund and found Insignia. At Insignia, I bought a couple of companies. I sold one. Plus I had my corporate side experience as well, to build on. And that's a prerequisite for Corum deal makers. The reason that we're all entrepreneurs is it gives us a different view on how to frame things for potential buyers, and also on how to prepare our clients. We invest heavily in client preparation. So understanding our client's business, being able to map that onto the buyer universe, and being able to present that in language which resonates in the correct way with the buyer, because all buyers are ADHD.
Okay, right.
All buyers are time poor. And by buyers, I mean buyers of businesses. So
sure.
Day of acquisition. So look, you've got a company that's been around for a very long time. We've done over 500 deals. That's more than anybody else in the tech mid-market space. We specialize in tech.
Okay, sure.
Tech software, but we do services. We sell a lot of service companies as well. IT services, we would encourage them to look at becoming managed services potentially, because managed services at the moment especially is commanding a premium over IT services. But as I said, you know, IT service, managed service tend to be more mature. You tend to look at profitability. Product companies, you tend to more look at, you know, the growth and the ability to grow.
So Richard, just on that point, could you tell, especially my students, the difference between a managed service and a standard IT company or service company?
Yeah, so a standard IT service company probably focused around statements of work. You're working very much on a project basis and you're billing by the hour. So it's all about, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to cost you X, Y, and Z. When you move into managed services, you're effectively outsourcing a function, a department, or a problem, right? Okay. So it becomes a solution sell, and you say, well, I'll just take that off your hands. I'm going to run it all. It allows you to do things like supply blended rates. So you could have a mix of product that you buy in. You could have a mix of, you know, you could even be reselling it. You've possibly got your element of reusable components that you're building in, but and then you've got your service desk because you're managing the whole thing as well as customization, bespoke development work. So it becomes a blended solution and answer to a problem. You also get the advantage that you move more to sort of annual or multi-year contracts. So you're saying, right, this is the solution we're providing. This is what it costs for 12 months. This is what it costs for 3 years. This is what it costs for 5 years. And that isn't, you know, viewed in quite the same way as SaaS, but it moves you up into that, you know, higher margin, predictable revenue, sticky, you know, especially if your product or whatever is mission critical, then these are absolutely.
It also gives you, you know, a pipeline that you've got visibility for 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So when we sell companies, you'll hear us talk about things like backlog, which is your pre-booked revenue that you can't recognize yet. So look, you've got the expertise of former founders. You've got 36 years of doing this, and we've got our own on-staff writers, our own staff analyst team. We've got 3 research centers. We buy in data from PitchBook, Cap IQ, and a whole host of others. We've got our own data, which we get from you know, the research team, from the deal makers, the deals we work on, the events we run, the education we run. So we've got free educational events. So if you or any of your readers want to join us for any of our research or any of our education events, I'm more than happy to get you plugged into that.
Great, thank you.
Because the one course that I wish I'd done earlier in my journey as a founder was selling up, selling out. I learned so much about what I needed to understand about the M&A process long before I thought it became relevant. Having taken a company through a number of startup accelerators, some of them say, oh, don't worry about the exit will come. I say that's not true. You want to plan for the exit from day one. Right? You can't necessarily guarantee what valuation you're going to get or even who you're going to sell to, but you need to be baking this knowledge into your business model and everything else. So you've got data, you've got team, and you've got process. And process is critical.
Yes, I noticed on your CV with one of the firms that you either grew or founded, I can't remember, sorry, you transitioned from being the growing guy to being the process guy, and I think you were responsible for it creating order from the chaos, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I started out doing my own stuff, I'd be very much I guess enthusiasm-led, evangelical-led. You know, we would just do it, right? It's better to do it, and you could improvise. The older I've got, the more I rein back from that and say, look, you don't need much structure in some cases, but you always need to have structure.
Sure.
And if you look at my career, even back from the mid-90s when I started selling enterprise software, first as technical pre-sales and then moving into partner and channel management, these enterprise sales were complex, right? They're high value sales, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of moving parts, especially within the organizations that you're selling into. It's not a single decision maker. You're even dealing anywhere up to the CEO level, right? Because it's a high value complex sale. If you look at Keenan systems, we used to sell billing systems in at 20 million in the 90s, right? That's a lot of money,
yeah,
right?
yes, yeah. Even then,
And even then, when you look at Prism Solutions, which became Ardent Software, and it's now part of IBM, it's their WebSphere data integration product set that it's become. You look at those products. I mean, they could be, for example, Gambro, which was a dialysis machine company based in Malmo in southern Sweden. They had bought God knows how many companies, and had 50 different data sets, companies. You have to integrate all of that into one. Huge projects, extremely complicated. And this kind of prepared me for M&A, because M&A is the most complex sale you are ever going to manage. Unless you're doing massive governmental, billion-dollar, things. This is the biggest thing and most complex thing. You need to have the experience and methodology codified and understood and battle hardened and battle tested, and you need people trained in it. And that's what you get from Corum. And Corum had been marketing to me, right? So I'm sitting there as a founder getting all this on the other side of the fence, and having been in it for 10 years and going, well, actually, you know what? Let's focus on the IP licensing. The deal maker from Corum's left. Okay, that's interesting. I bought a couple of companies at Insignia. I'd sold one before. Let's have a look at this. And I thought this sounds interesting. I get a lot of interesting founders. Right? They're all creating amazing things. They're all working really super hard at stuff. And I get to help them exit from the background of my successes, the background of my failures, where I've gone wrong. I can help them avoid it. With what I know about M&A, I can steer them into the position that, whether they're ready today or whether they're ready in 2 years or 3 years, they've got at least a very solid foundation and a very good chance of being able to get a exit off the back of that.
That leads me to another question I really wanted to ask. So a lot of the firms that I've helped grow on the consulting side, and also the founders that have sold who I have interviewed, they're very often reluctant to talk about how it's going once they've been bought, because they're in the earn-out period. They don't want to get sacked, and they certainly don't want to say it was a bad decision. So I mean, there's the obvious things. So I'm really asking you for your advice for somebody who is about to sell, in terms of they've got perhaps several offers on the table, they've got a decent multiple, their goals have been realized. There's the obvious stuff around, the fit with the company culturally and all the rest of it, and everyone loves banging on about that. But I'm guessing there are also more detailed things that you would have seen many times that perhaps some of my listeners haven't seen once yet. So what advice would, especially with professional services, but I'm guessing some of it's quite generic, what advice would you give on sort of on the seller's side in terms of what they should be, some of the common traps that they might fall into?
So the first trap is dealing with any one buyer.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So when you are a founder and you get somebody coming to you and saying, look, I want to buy your business. We're the best company out there. We love what you're doing. We can give you the best offer. You get a nice, fuzzy, warm glow and think, fantastic, if you've never done this before, right? And we have a saying at Corum, one buyer is no buyer. Right? It's great to have that inbound interest, but if you look at the stats, 75% of the time there is another company out there that will pay more than that buyer. 48% is the average improvement that you'll get on an offer, and some of the improvements are massively higher.
Okay, wow.
Right? Massively higher than that. And this is a buyer trick. It's a buyer tactic. If I'm on the buy side, I want you talking to me. I don't want you talking to anybody else. I want to come in with the lowest preemptive offer that I think is going to get you over the line to talk to me and give you all of the, perhaps brilliant other things that I can do for you in working together.
Yeah.
I'm going to be selling it to you to come to only me. So if you have inbound interest, get external advice, whether it's Corum or anybody else. Obviously, I recommend Corum, but above and beyond that, I recommend that you have an advisor, right? Because you need to have somebody that isn't you in this deal, so that you don't lose track of running your business, right? Because it's the same with investment. If I'm investing in a business personally or otherwise, or I'm raising money off an investor, that investor is probably going to look at the business and go, okay, this is your plan. Let's wait 3 months and see how you perform relative to that plan. So performance dipping during a process is bad. right? You've got to stay focused. And the process of selling a business is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? So you need somebody with you that's going to have emotional resilience, that's removed, one step removed. I'm not saying we're not passionate about the clients that we sell, we are, but we're emotionally removed. We're invested in this so we can be objective. And at the end of the day, also, the buyer doesn't necessarily have to like us. They do, because they buy more than one company off us and they keep coming back. So, you know, but it's having that impartial set of eyes that will help guide you through the process. And also, you don't know what you don't know. Right? Yeah. The first time you're doing anything, you need to have that expertise in there to help you and guide you, you know, and guide you through that process. So, you know, don't do it alone. Don't believe that first offer. But if you get inbound interest, and this is my greatest regret with Insignia, is I didn't run a full process when I had inbound interest.
Okay.
I accepted a very large offer in the early days. We started to get into due diligence. The founder of that company fell sick. He ended up selling his business to another company because he needed to manage his cash flow in a very rapid way. And that deal didn't happen. Now, 10 years on, that may ultimately prove we're going to make more money, but I've been in it for 10 years as opposed to running a full process at that early point in time. You spoke a little bit about culture, and everyone bangs on about it. So I'll only say one thing on culture. Culture can be bent, it can never be broken, right? You can bend a culture of the company that you're selling into, and that's a reason for selling in. So I've got a consultancy business. I do it better. I've got the right training, the right obtain, the right train, and the right retain mechanisms, and that will fit into an organization that's struggling a little bit with this. A little bit. So the bending of the culture either way works. Breaking the culture is a recipe for disaster. Integration is not an afterthought, right? So this is something you bake in with your advisor when you start out mapping out what is it that my business does really, and what makes it unique. And that's also challenging, because what you say is unique when you sell a product or sell a service is not the same as what is truly unique about your business from a buyer's perspective. I'll give you an example of that. If you look at products and you look at chatbots, everybody sells chatbots in the same way. Our chatbots are smarter, they give high customer satisfaction, they give blah, 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 blah. A buyer hears that and sees that and goes, chatbots are undifferentiated. There is no differentiating characteristic in any of these companies out there. It's a crowded market. So unless I really, really know what I'm doing, then leave that market alone. All right. So, you know, where buyer perception is that this is not clearly differentiated, you're going to have a smaller subset of very niche buyers. So if you want to have that appeal, you need to identify what is truly unique about your business from a buyer's perspective. And that means what they cannot replicate. And what another company cannot replicate quickly and easily.
Great. Okay, that leads me to another question that has, I guess it's something that's been bubbling in my head for a while, and that is the distinction between a good business and no, actually I need to rephrase this because it can be taken in the wrong way. So I've noticed that sometimes buyers want things that aren't necessarily the optimal thing for that business they're buying. You know, they want, I'm trying to think of an example, but firstly, there's the whole buying process that very often takes the founder's eye off the ball. But secondly, they do want, and obviously they want the senior team to have certain shareholding, because that means they're going to be likely to stay for a bit longer and to buy into the process. But are there any other areas where the buyer might want you to do things that perhaps aren't necessarily for the best of the business in the long term? I'm not sure that's a very good question.
For the best of the business in the long term, interesting.
If the answer is no, I don't mind looking silly.
No, I'm trying to think. So when you say other things that the buyer would want you to do that aren't for the best of your business, are you talking about things like pivoting you into products, or are you talking about refocusing from a market segment, or Can you give me an
Yeah,
example?
so I guess, let me think. So I'm guessing if I'm a founder, I've got a good consultancy. I guess part of it is around the is around recurring revenue, which is always, depicted as a good thing. Perhaps culture is a better example. Perhaps I'm a new business. I've got a very loyal team. Or not new, but a small business. So I've got 50 people. It's run as a family. We've got a very strong culture. When I sell, very often that disappears. And after the initial buyout period, perhaps it just becomes part of the board. So I think things like that.
So if you look at culture, as I said, integration is not an afterthought. You need to understand what culture you're selling into, who you're selling into, whether or not you can work with these guys, whether you as a founder are going to stay for any appreciable period. Now, founders can stay for an earn-out period of 1 to 3 years. They can either be employees, they can be consultants. They generally stay and are wanted by the buyer for a period of time, because companies without the founder tend to drop in value quite a lot. The key staff and key people, you need to understand who your key people are and then communicate to them at the right point in this process. Because if they perceive too much risk or they feel that they've been excluded, then these are the people that find it very easy to leave, because they people. So you've got to manage this comm plan and this integration plan. But as I said before, if you're talking about breaking a culture, my advice is don't do it. Not going to be a pleasant or successful experience. And when you sell a business, you don't just it's not like handing over the keys to your car or whatever and walking away into the sunset, right? You have something called reps and warranties. And as an advisory firm, Corum will help you negotiate, understand what is reasonable, what is not reasonable, negotiate them down to what is good for you and what is fair to the buyer. These are things that you represent as being true, historically, and also potentially moving forwards. For things that you represent may happen in the future, you may have either escrows, so holdbacks, money held back against them, or you might have earn-out related things. So the future that happens post-acquisition is important. And from an M&A firm, of course, it's important, because you never want to be selling bad deals, right? You don't want to sell a bad deal very often. But if you look at what's bad for the company, a buyer is not going to come to you and say, look, well, they're unlikely to. It may happen, right, where a buyer comes to you and they say, I love your business, but you know what? You're a 40, 50, 60 man company and you're doing too many things, right? You've got fintech customers, you've got retail customers, you've got supply chain customers, you've got manufacturing customers. You're so broad, right? The only buyer that might be interested in that is going to be huge, but then you've got to ask, well, what is the value a small company is adding in terms of depth to any one of those particular fields? So the smaller you are, the more you need to focus. However, when you said what is a good business as opposed to a saleable business, well, a good business is one that's making me money. So if I founded a business and I've got all of these people coming to me wanting to pay me money, I've got a good business. It's not necessarily going to make it saleable because I haven't got the focus. So you might get a buyer saying, well, you're more interesting to me if you are niche, expert, and at scale in one of these sectors, rather than being across the board. Because to broaden out, you really need to be in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of turnover, right? And that's a hard lesson to learn, because certainly with businesses that, when I started Insignia, we wanted to do far too many things rather than, narrowing down and having that focus. But that's about it, I think, but, at the end of the day, until you've sold, it's your company, right? So
you don't have to. No one's forcing
to do any of these things.
I mean, one thing I have seen a few times that I'm surprised buyers haven't learned from, and you might give the buyer's perspective, you might say, actually, there's a good reason for this. But what I've seen quite often is they'll buy a firm, the firm will carry on doing what it's doing, and there's some cross-selling and all the rest of it, and that's wonderful. But then they'll half that firm's marketing budget, for example, or they'll reduce obviously the decision-making power of the founder has been it has to be curtailed when he's selling, but he or she no longer has the ability to pull those big financial levers to say we're going to invest in this or we need to spend on marketing. And very often, I think to some founders, it seems short-termist thinking, in that the need for conformity and to fit process, whether it's the PSA or the ERP or whatever, overrides the unique value proposition of the firm that's being bought.
If that's the case, you're either selling to the wrong business, they haven't understood what your business does or the true value of your business, or you're running it without an advisor.
Okay.
When you sell a business, the two principal ways is either a share purchase agreement, so I buy the company, or an asset purchase. I buy the specific assets in your business that I want. Either way, you get down to a definitive agreement. However, there are some complexities to this. Sometimes it could be 100% acquisition. Sometimes it could be a significant majority, a simple majority. Sometimes it can be a minority, but with various covenants or restrictions or things that you add to the articles that give the investor certain powers of veto, etc. The key thing that you need, especially if you've got any form of earnout, etc., or if you are being left as a standalone venture or being rolled in, is you need to have the autonomy and control over the P&L for the things that relate to the deal levers of the business moving forwards at a minimum. So if you're going to be targeted on EBITDA or sales, you need to have the ability to know that those budgets exist. Now, you may, for example, if you're left standalone, be just left completely alone and told, right, here's some liquidity, so we'll buy some of your shares. Here's some investment, right? You can go and spend this investment for growth, but what we want to see is that you maintain this level of EBITDA alongside that, and at any point in time, you always retain a path to profit. So even if you're pushing hard on the accelerator, you can trim back in a very short space of time to make this business at least break even, so that we don't have to, pump in huge amounts of capital. So there are a lot of different deal mechanics and deal levers and deal structures that can come into play in all of this. And you need to have the relevant level of control agreed. And this means that it has to be negotiated as either part of that share purchase or asset purchase agreement, alongside any existing or additional conditions that might go into the articles if you're left as a standalone business. That's
brilliant. That's advice that I think everyone should listen to who is thinking of selling at any point. Get an advisor. I would say get an advisor earlier rather than later. Because I don't deal with the merger and acquisition at all. I just advise on growth before that. But I've had, as you can imagine, quite a few consulting founders come to me and say, "Oh, we're ready to sell now because our profits are great." And then you do a little audit of their IP, and they're selling themselves, really. They're selling the individuals, right? And there's no asset there to be. And if they'd come 2 or 3 years previously, we could have created a plan to. And I'm guessing this is something that perhaps is less relevant on the software side, or is it not?
Look, as I say, you don't know what you don't know. When you start building a business, you tend to focus on revenue and customers. So you're optimizing everything to get revenue and customers. That doesn't necessarily give you the optimal metrics, structures, processes to raise investment, let alone sell. The key thing that I would say with any company is never have commercial agreements that would allow a prospective acquirer of your business to get all of the benefits of an acquisition without actually acquiring you. We call it getting the milk without buying the cow.
Okay, right.
If you let a buyer get the milk without buying the cow, they'll go for the milk every time.
Okay.
So you've got to be careful of OEM partnerships, strategic partnership agreements, things like that. If you are selling yourself, there's nothing wrong with selling yourself. It's called an acqui-hire, right? It's where we essentially say, actually, this is a unique pool of individuals. They're very hard to find and recruit. I'll buy the business because I now need to expand out to the US and set up a consultancy center in the UK or in Europe or wherever, right? So that does happen. Acqui-hires tend to be priced lower though,
Mm.
right? So if you can build that codified knowledge, as you say, it makes life a lot easier to get a higher valuation for you. The other side of it is in ops. You can do really simple things in ops, like keep all your documents in a decent file structure that echoes what I would use in a data room.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So then you've got operational data stores for documents, and you've got simple guidelines on what you put in an NDA for employees as well as the businesses you engage with. What are necessary clauses to have in commercial contracts? What you should avoid in commercial contracts? You're not even going to consider these if you've not.
No.
Right, you're not. No. You don't. I didn't. Right, and you kind of get battle hardened when you go through your first investment round, and you get into that due diligence. When we were raising for Insignia, and then the investors' lawyers comes back and say, I don't like your IP assignment. What's wrong with it? It's drafted by a lawyer. Well, you didn't. And it's like, okay, so you actually want this written in calligraphy and not just in cursive, right? It's that level of detail. But there are basic things in commercial contracts, like you might find you deal with a large corporate and they go, well, we want right of first refusal. We want first offer, last offer. We want notification if you ever get sold. Some of these things are okay, framed correctly. Others are complete no-go areas that could cause you so much pain that you just want to be not having them in contracts. And if you don't have external advice, or you don't have anybody on your team that's been through it before, it can be very hard to push back on, right? Because you kind of feel like it's a huge corporate, we're a small consultancy. You're lucky to get in this business. You've got to be careful with those things. So there are things that you can do, both operationally and in terms, as you say, coming to you, getting that understanding of what I need to do for growth, and then dovetailing that into what I need to do to be sold successfully in 5-10 years. And the earlier you start it, the better. And one of the key reasons is because market timing matters. Okay, there are things that are macroeconomics, completely outside of your control, can make the difference. So John Scott, John is the chairman of Corum Group. He's actually a former Corum client who then crossed over.
Okay.
And joined the ranks of M&A advisors, of investment bankers. And he had a business where he had got offers. He then tripled his revenue, tripled his growth, tripled his profits, and then went to sell the business. And he actually got offers that were half.
Wow.
He got 3 years ago.
Wow. Was this the 99 to 2001, or was it later?
That's exactly when it was. And if you come to our one of our merge briefings at Corum, merge briefing is different from CISO. CISO is an education event, teaches you the mechanics of selling and what you need to know about M&A to sell your business. The merge briefing talks about market dynamics. So this is the current macroeconomic conditions, the current multiples, current deals that are going through, the indices that we track. And this is consolidated information and enriched as well. So it's enriched by deal maker expertise as well as our analyst expertise. And this will show you, if you look at it, you've got a spike around .com, right? So it came up, then the enterprise values dropped. You then went into Death Valley for a good number of years before we got a micro peak just before the 2008 crash, then down again. And then there is this almighty upward trend where every time it dips, it goes up again, right? And it just keeps on going up and up and up.
Wow, okay.
And it makes the .com peak look like a blip.
Gosh.
So if you take the same logic, and in .com, there were a lot of us who made a lot on stock options, who saw things going up and didn't necessarily manage to sell everything at the peak because we thought it was going to carry on going up forever. Nothing carries on going up forever. So the expectation is the longer it doesn't correct, bigger the correction, when it comes. And then there is going to be a period before it recovers and carries on. If you look at longer term, 10 to 20 years, I think things generally go up. I mean, this is what we see from stock market indices. I mean, the classic one is, you're better off, I think it's the Warren Buffett model of the world, isn't it? You're much better off investing, compounding in a stock market index over a long period of time than you are trying to work out what's going on and bet on specific things. So
Richard, brilliant. Now, just two quick notes, selling up, selling out, and the merge briefing. will both be on your website, and so I'll link to those in the show notes if that's okay.
Awesome. Yeah, please do. Please
Brilliant.
do. Fantastic. Thank you.
But otherwise, thank you so much. There's so much of value that's in there, and I just really appreciate you sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.